I think it's highly useful because obviously everyone sees those stats, and we've reiterated some of those statistics about these, monthly transfer volumes already either surpassing or being almost on the level of kind of like legacy payment rails like Visa, Mastercard, PayPal, and even getting to be like a good chunk of ACH, which very impressive.
It's not like going 10% every year. It's like on track to do like 300, 400% year over year growth.
Hey everyone, I'm Andrew on the enterprise research team at Messari, and this week we have a special edition of our Unqualified Opinions pod as we release our State of Stablecoins report. Today I'm happy to be joined by Anthony Yim of Artemis. Anthony, thanks for joining me today to talk about data and stablecoins.
Of course, my favorite subject as someone who's been in payments for almost a decade. It's too long.
It's great to have you on. Recently, Artemis put out a pretty large report on stablecoin payments, some of which we've highlighted in our own deck. And among the quite a few contributors, we had also used Artemis to kind of display some interesting data insights. I was wondering if you could maybe walk me through who was surveyed in that report and the methodology you guys used, and maybe we can go into some highlights there along the way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, maybe just a quick background on myself. So I was one of the early engineers of Venmo. I joined back in 2013 when the team was still pretty small, worked with the founders, and so have seen kind of payments, fintech 1.0, if you would call it, and just how bad, honestly, the legacy infrastructure is. And I think I speak for both of us that we're both excited about crypto because it's just this like internet native rail that you can transfer value, right? I feel I'm preaching to the choir, but that obviously was like never the case in the last really like 40 years in the United States. And so fast forward today, we hear from our customers over and over again asking for like, hey, like how much are people actually like making payments for everyday goods or B2B services on stablecoins? And Messari is also obviously a crypto data company, and you guys have you guys also see that like stablecoins have a ton of volume, but within that there's a lot of like DeFi activity mixed in as well, right? And so it's not clear what is B2B payments. And so we honestly heard this question so much that I was just like, okay, let's just roll up the sleeves and start working with as many partners as possible to build this never seen before data set from the ground up. And so it was really a project that was many months in making. And so we approached over 30 different stablecoin sort of PSP and orchestrators and various like stablecoin businesses in the world. We just wanted maximum coverage and asked them to share sort of their last 3 years of payment volumes. And the promise was that we will obviously like anonymize it and keep it confidential, but we wanted just like a high level sort of state of stablecoin payments volume number, so that like the world can see that stablecoins is real. It's used for many different use cases, and that was honestly like the sort of impetus for the stablecoin report. And and the methodology was fairly simple. It was just we went to every possible company and asked them for data and sort of anonymized it and secured it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's highly useful because obviously everyone sees those stats, and we've reiterated some of those statistics about these, monthly transfer volumes already either surpassing or being almost on the level of kind of like legacy payment rails like Visa, Mastercard, PayPal, and even getting to be like a good chunk of ACH, which very impressive. But as you said, I feel like that number is it's more of a ceiling perhaps on what that actual volume is, given there's internal centralized exchange transfers, MEV, all that stuff. So
Exactly.
It's nice that this report kind of put just a legitimate floor on like what is going on just among the firms you surveyed. So yeah, highly useful. Definitely recommend people check it out. One thing we've highlighted with some of our contributors like Sphere Labs is this growth of B2B payments using stablecoins on the back end. And you guys have also highlighted this as kind of like the majority of the transaction volume among the surveyed firms. So might be interesting if you have any insights there on what you think might be driving that, what type of businesses are kind of flocking to this infrastructure, and why is it better than what they could get elsewhere, I guess.
Yeah, the simple answer is just speed and cost.
Mm.
I mean, I think that's like the promise. That's like the promised land of crypto, right? But I think more specifically, and I actually have a funny personal anecdote. So my father actually, operates a business in Asia, and he was like complaining about Swifts, and he doesn't actually understand what I do day to day at work, and he was complaining about how much it costs to pay his partners by Swift, and so I was like, Dad, I have something you should
boy,
learn about.
boy, do I have something for you.
Yeah, and so he runs a small business. I think it's a little quite too early for him to use stablecoins, but that's a big part of it. Especially at size, I think it's waiting for days, and especially for like sort of payment corridors that don't have good correspondent banking infrastructure. If you're waiting for several millions of dollars in payments and you have to wait 5 days, that's significant burden on your business, right? I think for us, working in software, it's like kind of hard for us to comprehend. But most businesses, you ship first and you take payment later, and so it's like any delay in payments is extremely significant. And I think us as Americans also like live in we have frankly a pretty decent financial infrastructure, but like that's not true for the rest of the world. And so a lot of the uptick is from corridors that just aren't well served by traditional sort of payments infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the opaque part that people in developed economies also don't see at all, because they have Venmo, they have Zelle, they have PayPal, all of these options that are very seamless. They're like, why would I use stablecoins? But
Yeah,
if
or like
you,
Ramp, right? It's like we
yeah,
use Ramp to bill pay and like right, and
right, like
so
corporate expense management, treasury management, like there's all of these solutions and developed infrastructure. But meanwhile, if you're abroad and you're a global business, you have global suppliers, or you need to pay people cross border. We highlighted a ton of stats in our deck about just how expensive it can be to just do a simple B2B cross border payment. And these metrics that are tracked like by the Financial Stability Board or World Bank, they're not really trending in the right direction necessarily on average. Like it still might cost you, 2% to cost to send a cross border payment B2B. And as you mentioned, like certain financial regulatory entities like the FSB, they have these goals for how fast, they want the average payment to be eventually. And most of them, very, very few of them, I think around like sub one third of them are, being received by the recipient within 1 hour. And there's still like 30, maybe 30+% of these payments that they track that are not even getting there within a day. And, multiple days of funds getting tied up is pretty, can be like debilitating if you're, a small business trying to make it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, and I do think that's like kind of a not well understood by people who maybe they first hear about stablecoins and they're like, why would I need this in America? So definitely worth highlighting. And it's interesting that the peer-to-peer volumes, I think, are perhaps that's been like kind of the main narrative I think that people think of, but there are these other budding payment flows that are coming, like just B2C, and that might be like more gig economy payouts. Was there any like insights from you guys on that segment or the other segments outside of B2B?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say one category that we are pretty excited about is like, so the B2C, for example, encompasses checkout, for example, by crypto. So if you're, say, like a consumer who is swiping their card, and so for example, like specifically, Binance is, for example, one of our partners in this report. They offer a product that allows you, for example, in France, to check out at a grocery store using your Binance account. And so it's like on the POS system, you can like, I believe it's like a QR code that you can like scan to basically log in and check out with the funds that you have in Binance. And so that actually is so technically it's C2B, but just for like, I think B2C just rolls off the tongue a little bit better.
Right.
And so we categorize that as B2C. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because like Binance just has so many users across the world, and just using, if you've made money off of your crypto, like if you can just buy everyday goods with it, that's basically the idea. And so I think that's a pretty unique case there. And as in addition to the card linked payments,
Mm.
and so that's essentially swiping your Gnosis, your Reap, your Holy Held. So those are some of the partners that were part of this report. It's actually swiping their Visa, Mastercard card, but it settles behind the scenes in crypto. But the merchant will actually never know that it's crypto. But you, as a user who has crypto, that's going
Yeah,
fast.
I think that was one of the big takeaways too from our report, where I think we're like converging on a world where on-chain balances and what you hold on a centralized exchange and what you might hold just like in a private wallet, they're kind of becoming, those balances are becoming more fungible, and the infrastructure is kind of linking up so that you can not really have to off ramp. And you know, on the back end, merchants can just accept this new pool of capital that's kind of wanting to be spent, but might have difficulty like getting back to traditional payment rails. I do find
Yeah,
the stablecoin,
exactly.
like, yeah, like the stablecoin link card's kind of interesting because from what we saw, you know, some of these companies that tap into Visa or Mastercard, one of them we covered was called Rain, where it's just easy for someone to spend their stablecoin balances. I
But I think to
wanted
your point, right? It's like you don't need to off ramp. This is the off ramping, right?
right,
And
right,
so
right, right.
because like you off ramp to spend, right? And so you might as well just like
Do you think
cut to the chase.
that puts like a dent in maybe some of the bullish argument is like, oh, okay, like we're gonna supplant the card networks, you know,
Mm.
and meanwhile, like Visa, Mastercard are doing a ton of stuff within stablecoins. Like they have a ton of initiatives to like integrate and tokenize things and be able to accept for merchants. I want like, do you have any opinion there about, because it seems like we're some of these companies are inadvertently they're piggybacking off of Visa's and Mastercard's network effect as opposed to, you know, completely supplanting it. I think it's really hard
Yeah.
to get around those network effects.
Yeah. My personal view is that this actually makes Visa Mastercard stronger.
Mm,
Um, I think Visa and Mastercard just have incredible brand reach from like a pure mainstream. Like my parents, trust Visa and Mastercard, and also early in Venmo days, we saw so many startups trying to like evolve past this like card interaction. There's like this pull a card out of your raw wallet and just swipe kind of like behavior. There were these crazy startups that are like, oh, use sound, like ultrasound to like check out, but ultimately it's like the card form factor is really simple. It works even if there's no like fancy, toast or square terminal. It doesn't matter where in the world you use, everyone recognizes it. Like you go to any
right.
restaurant, you don't speak the language, they don't know what a card is. It's just like incredibly, it just has incredible longevity. And so I think like this idea of a Visa card that or Mastercard that just like settles in stablecoins is actually what's probably going to win.
Mm,
And yeah, and this is from like, yeah, having just seen so many companies try to like, I don't know, annihilate Visa, and it just like it never happens. And I think furthermore, the card networks offer something that I think um, people also don't really realize, which is this sort of dispute process and like the rules around what happens if like I order a pizza from Uber Eats and it comes burnt, or it's like the order's wrong, right? I can actually launch this dispute process. There's an intermediary that like adjudicates and then like decides, okay, who gets a refund. Like none of that infrastructure exists in stablecoins, and I think it's like there, and that's the value of these card networks too, that just never gets spoken about. I think in generally.
yeah, totally agree. Like on the one hand, you have the merchants who don't like the chargeback risk, but on the other hand, they kind of need to accept Visa and Mastercard for the most part if they want to tap into the biggest available customer base. But I do think that the for the card networks, their value prop is perhaps underrated, and there's good reasons why that hasn't really been picked away at yet. But Yeah, it's interesting how they themselves are trying very hard to like not disrupt themselves, but like integrate themselves into these rails as well. Yeah, perhaps the risk to them is a bit overstated. I remember, I think their stocks went down on the day
Oh yeah, I heard that.
Walmart, Amazon were thinking
Yeah.
about issuing their own coin. So yeah, it's an interesting competitive dynamic, but it's hard to see necessarily changing in the near term. One other thing that you guys and we've also highlighted was I don't know this just persistent dominance of Tron as a settlement network of choice for stables. I have some not theories but ideas on why that's been so sticky. Does Artemis or you have like kind of a take on from these companies why they end up using Tron
Mm.
like just in a dominating form. Like it really, even across, I was surprised even across Europe. It's not just an EM story, but like a lot of these companies are using Tron.
Yeah, I mean, we'll also share notes and see what you think too. Yeah, so I think you're right. So Tron is still extremely dominant. I mean, I think long story short, they're one of the early. They obviously work very closely with Tether. Like they support Tether from the early days. I think the sort of the rise of Tron and Tether go very hand in hand, right? And so
Mm,
frankly speaking, Tron is one of the first low cost chains. It's at least like lower than Ethereum, right? And I think that's what matters to users. Even if you talk to them today, users are like, I just want to send money the most cheaply and whatever has the most like liquidity, so I can do my swap with from one currency to another with the least amount of slippage. And so like all that matters really for users are liquidity and that you could do it cheaply. And I think you because of sort of how early Tether and Tron have been in the market, that's just where all the liquidity is. And
mhm.
and I think that's actually a really powerful like moat, right? Because like in order to match that, you essentially have to come up with a lot of money to like match the amount of liquidity in all these different markets. And I think that is also what Circle is trying to do, and that is what's necessary in order to like sort of transact in on ramp and off ramp in any currency through USDC. But it's just like Circle's, sorry, Tether has been doing it for much longer with Tron.
Yeah, I think the kind of centralized exchange distribution channel is just
Yes, that too,
it's
exactly.
it just set in motion a lot of user behavior. I think early on when
Yeah,
Tron kind of had free USDT transfers, like through Binance. I think that definitely set in motion a lot of behaviors that just like stuck.
yeah,
You have millions of users onboarded, and they're like, "Oh, this is like a just better alternative than using any other network for now." There's no
yeah.
Solana back then, and are not widely used.
Yeah, I actually have a funny story where I was I went to an OTC like desk in Hong Kong recently because I was just curious like actually what it's like to use it to go to like a street stand essentially and like on ramp into crypto. And the only currency they supported for stablecoins was USDT on Tron.
Hmm.
Like there was no other option. And I believe they're just using Binance behind the scene or
Right.
like OKX. And so like right, like obviously Binance and OKX I think have a lot more, or at least like Binance, right? It's a very, again, like much more native support for USDT, at least for a long time. Now they have USDC as well, but I 100% agree with what you're saying. Like you can see that even anecdotally on the ground that like it's just like a lot of it's like a user behavior. Like USDT just always been a big part of finance and all these like exchanges outside the United States that many millions of people use.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, with the rise of kind of even lower cost chains, L2s and the SVM, like people haven't really migrated like the as far as, the firms you surveyed and kind of if we track active addresses or kind of other metrics, just still vast majority of this volume like hasn't moved to Sol, even though rationally might make more sense to do so. Just a very interesting phenomenon and kind of speaks to how important the initial seeding of these behaviors through centralized exchanges kind of set this ball in motion. And as to what you said before, like it's very hard to unseat Tether when, all of those trading pairs across centralized exchanges are just vastly more liquid. There's more spot markets. It's just better depth for trading. And so everyone just wants to hold it and warehouse Tether as opposed to anything else. But yeah, interesting stuff. So we've kind of talked about B2B flows, we've talked about Tron and Tether and some B2C flows as well, and card-like payments. Do you think there's anything that people might be missing from this narrative? Like one of our internal contributors said that people are focusing too much on peer-to-peer and the enterprise adoption's the real story. Do you guys have like an equivalent of maybe there's a facet of this story here that people aren't paying as much attention to?
My answer was going to be the Visa and Mastercard piece.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah,
like
I
yeah,
agree with that. Like it's kind of underweight, and I feel like there's this assumption that, just because stablecoins win on costs and efficiency means that they can just win out if they get enough distribution. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Like it is pretty hard to supplant. There's an entire set of user behavior through cards that's pretty tough to beat. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the broader thing, and this is, I think, bullish for both like Messari and Artemis, is that like, the rise of stablecoins and people just being on chain, I think will, let's say everyone is like able to hold stablecoins, whether you're in Brazil, India, very easily, like Egypt, Europe, and they're going to have lots of cash. And what are they going to do with this cash? They're going to look for investment opportunities because they want their cash to work for them. And so I think like, very much, I think the last 6 months, like the only thing that's been up is like Bitcoin and stablecoins. At least, obviously stablecoins at $1, but like supply's been up, right? And so, and I think like a lot of these alts and kind of like DeFi activity has been like more of a like sort of roller coaster, or even some of the alts have been like sort of down only in the last couple of months. But I think like in the long run, I think stablecoins will actually like just, again, it's like there's more liquidity coming into blockchains is good, and then from there, I'm sure all these smart like entrepreneurs will figure out a way to build awesome products off of it. But I think it's just like sort of the stablecoins is just like step one, and I think I'm really glad that we're like finally there, because you just need a lot more liquidity into the system, and then people will figure out what to do. There'll be really cool protocols that come out, and for the next whatever X years, and I think that is like sort of the the hopium I have for for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like we're pretty much just getting started. I think one thing I mentioned on our other podcast was that it feels like a lot of the traditional players let's say outside of the payment companies, because obviously Stripe, Visa, Mastercard are pretty heavily involved and they're trying to get ahead of this. But definitely on the TradFi and like the banking side, I think a lot of people were caught off guard by how quickly Congress kind of
Mm,
corralled around getting this
genius,
legislation through.
yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like they're not fully prepared to like offer new products and services around this, and they're kind of some like JP Morgan has obviously thought about tokenized deposits, but it feels very nebulous and like they're not totally sure how this fits in for them among their product lines. What is do you have any takes on recent regulatory progress? What it's going to mean for the space? Is it do you think that the banks kind of win through their own distribution if they launch their own stablecoin? Any thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, I think first off, businesses want clarity, pun intended. I think it's, and so I think regulation, yeah, it's sensible regulation, which I think like the Genius Bill is a good start. I think there's a lot of, questions left open still, but I think it's a good start. And I think that's always good for these large businesses. I think for small businesses, like startups, like, you can take a lot more risk, but for big companies, if Uber or Airbnb wants to start thinking about using stablecoin to settle and manage their treasury, it's like they can't just like YOLO it, right? And
Right.
so I think that it's just like the passing of genius is just momentous. I think it's and it's kind of funny because like I think my non-crypto friends are like, yeah, whatever, and I'm like, dude, you guys don't know how big this is. Like we've been waiting for this for like many years, like
Mhm.
right. And I think Clarity would have this like same level of like sort of clarification for business, because I think are these tokens commodity, like in what case, what kind of disclosures are we expected, and I think that's all having like a clear, transparent,
Yeah.
like having like lawyers be able to like interpret this and like tell you clearly, okay, what can you do as a business, is like very important, right? And so
I- It's
um
it's funny to think about that like even just a year ago, under Gensler, people were confused about which regulatory body like the TC or the SEC was actually had
Yep,
authority over
exactly.
these various things, and like who could, it's like it's kind of insane when you think about it. It's like these financial products are out there and we just like didn't put together anything about how it should be regulated. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely a net positives, or like the rate of change is in the right direction on that front.
And I
I'm
think to
like,
your second question on banks, my opinion is that like I don't know whether like banks should tokenize their own, launch their own stablecoin or they should partner. But I do think that people, and this is what we hear from working with our partners, is that like again, in order for there to be incredibly like cheap FX, you just need again more liquidity. And who has liquidity? All the traditional banks who did FX or who do FX
mhm,
today.
yeah,
They have many orders of magnitude more liquidity than what's on a DEX right now. And so I think in order again for us to move the economy on chain, like we have to involve these like large financial institutions in some way. But I think how exactly, who knows? And I think that's where it's opportunity for entrepreneurs.
yeah. And one thing there, it's like maybe some people gloss over when we're talking about this, but as long as there's like local fiat involved and someone needs to get paid in local fiat, it certainly complicates things. And it's not, if everyone just held a wallet that you could, and everyone just holding USDC or USDT, like we wouldn't have as many issues or problems to solve. But even in like the long tail of currencies, like for those large players who warehouse FX risk, it might it's just straight up unattractive to be providing liquidity in some of these currency pairs. And if you have to swap from one EM currency to another, it just might not be, it's not really a problem that's going to be fixed in the current regime, because it's not a profitable, it's not a very attractive business for someone to take that on. And the amount of like regulatory burden that banks face in doing that is a cost. And so we probably need to create even more new legislation and kind of structures for like integrating these things into the current system.
Yeah, I like to call this phase like the awkward teenager phase of like crypto, right? It's like I think, yeah, and like to your point, it's like ideally everyone just has a wallet, and it's like it's already on, using even like a DeFi stablecoin. I don't know, but it's like, but we're just, it's the problem is that we're not there right now. It's like, what do you do in the meantime?
Right, right. Yeah. And it'll probably be like months to years before some of these bigger players either get up to speed or get more heavily involved in a way that like actually boosts liquidity for these
Yeah,
kind of currency pairs that are tough to manage for whatever reason.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, hopeful for the future. At least we're kind of getting started in the right direction. One other thing you guys mentioned was stablecoin pre-funding. We also covered Huma Finance and kind of the inefficiencies they're fixing over there. Just because with a lot of these long tail currencies, say you're doing a cross-border payment, usually someone is holding the local fiat in a bank account and warehousing some of that risk. It's just sitting there waiting to be credited or debited in, whoever's receiving the payment, their account. Can you maybe talk about what you guys found on the pre-funding part, what inefficiencies it's kind of solving there?
yeah. What we found was more around like businesses using this sort of pre-funding product that ARF, not I believe under Huma
Mhm.
and Mansa, to essentially like bridge short-term liquidity gaps that they need to just run the business. And part of it's also like because of this like weird awkward teenager phase that we were in with sort of crypto interacting, or businesses and interacting with like part crypto system, part non-crypto system. And so that you always have this like delay in some part of the system that you're waiting cash on. And so, and you might have all this like, and like and so you have revenue coming in, but it's like not here yet. And so, but you have liquidity needs. And so you have this like sort of pre-funding product that can help bridge that problem for you. And so I think that's one of these like clever, right? We were talking about how we get through this like awkward teenager moment. I think that's a lot of the work that, yeah, these guys are doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting some of these solutions still like even Huma's like PayFi network, they're still integrating some of their settlement with Visa and Mastercard on the back end, which is interesting because it seems like it's really tough to totally supplant the current structures.
Yeah,
And that seems to be
absolutely.
like a recurring trend with a lot of these companies.
Yeah, we are also very addicted to the old ways, and it's hard to wean off. In
For
you know,
sure.
yeah.
Um, is there anything else that Artemis is kind of looking forward to tracking within the stablecoin space, data wise, or are you guys gonna try to do another one of these reports where you source bottom up data from these companies?
Yeah, hopefully. I think for sure. I think it's just like a very helpful data set to have. Less so for folks like you and I who are crypto native and deep in the space, but I think it's really for the folks who, you know, at a Fortune 500 who are just starting to hear about Genius and like, okay, like, what's actually going on. And so like making this report and data set appealing to them and just seeing like how fast like KYB and KYC payments are growing. It's not like going 10% every year. It's like on track to do like 300-400% year over year growth. And so like
Right.
I think that's the goal. And if we can prove that, hey, this growth is continuing, I think that's really beneficial for the rest of us who's in this space. And so for sure that, and I think the other thing that we're very excited about is just like RWAs. I mean, stablecoins are a type of RWAs, and I think to my earlier point, is like stablecoins is kind of it's like first inning. But I think there's a lot more to come. It just takes time, and I like to remind actually our team. If you look at the adoption of cloud over the last like 15 years, I saw a report recently, even like today, in 2025, I think like, and this was actually from a Datadog investor call. They quoted that I think there's still only about like 50% of businesses are like sort of quote unquote cloud native,
Oh
and
yeah.
back in like 2011 it was like 3%. And so, and I would think, working in, I think, technology, my guess would be like, oh, like 90% of companies are like cloud based, but it's like, no, we're still like really far from that. And I think that's the same
Yeah.
story for crypto. It's just like this is a very slow to adopt.
I think being somewhat crypto native and being attuned to like all of this news flow and fast moving information, you overestimate the base rate of how fast other
Yes,
businesses
exactly.
and people move. But yeah, because I remember seeing those stats as well, just like super low penetration was obviously going to go higher, but it's crazy how long it takes for these organizations to just move
Yeah.
and make changes. And I imagine for financial infrastructure, that will take arguably just as long as like replacing some tech stack you have.
Yeah.
Like you probably even more so you might trust it less in the beginning
Yeah.
than new technology because there's
The
just
stakes are
probably
higher.
the stakes are higher, harder possibly to understand and pitch to someone,
Yeah.
especially with all like built in over the years stigma against crypto native
Yeah.
solutions.
Yeah.
So we're still wiping that away.
Yeah.
So on the maybe more on the decentralized or crypto native side, is there anything in the stablecoin or DeFi space that kind of more exciting to you now or interesting, or perhaps on the data side even?
I think I'm starting to hear, more infrastructure on the DeFi side being built for like FX. So again, I think that's
Mm,
a really good mix of sort of like huge major, use case, like massive market in traditional finance, but like leveraging these like really truly like groundbreaking primitives that crypto has come up with. And I think that's always the stuff that makes me the most excited, is like when those two come together. And if there's a way for like individuals to, to be liquidity providers and make money off of like FX, like that's really awesome. Like
right.
why not? Like that's another way for somebody to make money on the side and have passive income. Or right, I think that is like the real promise of crypto. It's like, financial sort of like inclusion, and anyone who has an internet connection can participate in this like global economy. I think that's super awesome.
Yeah, I think on that note, it seems like a lot of crypto native solutions and even Circle's, payment network that they're fleshing out. I think one of the takeaways is that a lot of things in TradFi are already efficient and spreads can be very low, like
Mm.
within FX, but those really good rates might be wholesale or interbank rates, and the average
Yes,
user doesn't have
exactly.
access to them. And so
Yes.
if we create new systems, it's not that the old systems are terribly inefficient on average across, who's doing volume. But if
Yeah.
you're a small player, you don't have access to those rates. And so, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
No, that's very well said. And I think like I've been doing a lot of like sort of like long-term thinking recently because we're doing like annual planning on our side, and I think one thing that was clear is like, if you look at it as from like a massive time scale, it's like, and like you look at sort of these like major technological revolutions in the history of humanity, like the printing press, or like Ford Model T. It's when the printing press is involved, like if you were a nobility or if you were like the church, you can read books and you can make books, but like it's completely locked out for the everyday people, right? And the same thing with like automobile. Like before Henry Ford, it's like, okay, you have to have a horse, or like you have to be really rich to like have any
Right.
kind of like vehicle or luxury of mobility. But technology always has a way to like make these things that were only available wholesale, available to every person in the world. And I truly believe that's crypto. And so you're right. Like, why should an average person be locked out of these like sort of wholesale FX rates? Like it shouldn't be. It's a technological problem, and I think in one day it'll be solved, and it'll be solved through crypto.
Right. On that note, I think there's a lot of obviously positive developments. One thing I asked one of our other guests is to have a more measured take. Say stablecoins are incredibly successful, and even the treasury thinks they're going to grow like 8x over the next 5 to 10 years, and say that scenario happens. I do think we probably don't talk enough about the second order effects of some of these countries they have capital controls for a reason, because it's
Mm,
tough for them to
yes.
manage their monetary policy, and you
Yep.
have all these people fleeing to dollars. There could be real negative ripple
Yeah.
effects from everyone just trying to hop on the dollar train.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts there on like kind of the bearish counter argument for where this gets super successful and
Mm.
proliferates? It's probably not talked about enough about negative side effects that could happen.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question. Because, like, yeah, if your country has like a weak currency, like this is only going to actually weaken the country's currency, and then you're going to have like destabilization, and then there's
Yeah,
this, like sort of like death spiral that happens to some of these countries.
and
Yeah, it's such.
we're for now it's like you guys also mentioned how this is stablecoins more broadly are going to be used as a sort of strategic financing and geopolitical tool. Like the Treasury has Besson has mentioned that he's looking at it because government is financing huge deficits, and you have these kind of this large marginal buyer of treasuries, short-term treasuries now. So it's interesting that stablecoins are no longer going to be just collateral on centralized exchanges, but they're big enough to be kind of tools in this broader geopolitical picture. Definitely come a long way, but it'll be interesting to see the ripple effects of that maybe in a few years down the line.
Yeah, and my best guess is that it's very idiosyncratic to the country that it affects, and like their economic situation, right? It's like what are their main industries? Like, are they net, or are they a net importer or exporter? Like it's just so dependent on that country and its economics and its like monetary policy. It's really hard to say, but it's for sure a risk that I think it's like, and I think that's why it's also interesting to follow sort of non-US dollar stablecoin development too. I think that's right. In theory, like that's one solve, right? And I think if these smaller governments can promote a usage of a local currency stablecoin, perhaps that can sort of alleviate some of these immediate
Yeah.
issues. Yeah.
It's interesting how that just like hasn't really taken off even in developed economies. Like the circles your C is just I think it's around like 200 mil in market cap. But yeah, I don't know if that changes really. I'm a little surprised that like in developed economies they still want dollars, even though I think this year the dollar had the had the worst start to half of the year in like I don't
Yeah.
know since the 1980s or something. So maybe that changes over time. Like people are like, oh wait, maybe I don't want to hold dollars as much.
Yeah.
But thus far it hasn't really been the case.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the questions on like what else would you hold if it's not dollar or like Bitcoin? It's like, well, there's actually no other. It's like choose your poison. They're
Yeah,
all
sort of
inflationary.
gold, probably not. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting stuff. Is there anything else you want to touch on, maybe from the payment report, or anything you think we missed there?
No, I think that covers most of it.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, I appreciate your time today.
Yeah,
If
likewise.
our viewers want to find out more about Artemis, your guys' data platform, or about you, where can they go?
Yeah, they can follow Artemis at Artemis on X, and you can also follow me at Anthony Yim, my full name, on Twitter or X.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Andrew.